Wow. And where's that? Where does it run? I mean, what's the?
It's called the Wilson Mountain Parkway, and it goes from a mountain community to the interstate. So it's a
Okay.
direct route from the community to the interstate instead of having to go through several towns.
Oh, wow. Terrific. That's, I'm sure that's, that's really going to open up a lot of things and create a lot of opportunity that way.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah. Well, let's shoot Carlos a note, make sure he's jumping on board and, go ahead and make sure he's got the Zoom link. Everybody does, but what are we doing on our group? Okay, well, we're still waiting on Carlos and Nimitz. Just gonna go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and let everybody in, and we perhaps have a little general discussion. Give it just a couple of minutes. Is that okay with y'all?
Yeah, and I will text Nimit right now. Let
Yeah,
me see if I have
yeah. I
Carlos
just sent
on.
him a note also. Let's give it just another minute. Minute for Nimitz. A little
Okay.
envious of your wallpaper, Tricia.
Huh?
Said I'm a little envious of your wallpaper.
I thought it would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Nimit says he's joining.
Okay, great. What's going on with the AI industry in Utah, Amelia? Is there much development that you're aware of, or is it?
Got we've got an area, kind of a tech sector called Silicon Slopes,
Yes.
and there definitely is some activity on top of that. Our governor's office of economic opportunity has a fund that is dedicated to emerging technologies, and
Hmm.
so most of what you're seeing with the AI industry is is folks kind of working in the startup space.
Gotcha.
um, we also have a fairly strong federal and defense community. So that's kind of where we're starting to see like the defense industry and the emerging tech industry kind of coming together with that technology. So there's definitely a budding sector. It's not, I mean, it's not like it is in the Bay Area, but
Right.
we definitely have quite a few startups. I mean, I could think of probably five or six just off the top of my head that are working on utilizing AI for healthcare or utilizing AI for cybersecurity or utilizing, AI in the defense industry. So,
Right, right, right. Um, well, I just got back from the first decentralized AI conference in the world, last weekend. And what's coming down the pipeline is kind of mind numbing. I've really been on a fast track, to understand, the regulatory landscape, and what this Biden executive order means.
yeah,
And,
so
that's a big deal
it is.
because,
It
I mean,
absolutely So I'm on the National Association of Counties AI Working Group.
Okay,
And so I've got at least, you know, where I'm email threads 3-4 times a week plus monthly meetings. And obviously we've been going through the executive order significantly. I'm also in the process of working with our state privacy officer and our state auditor's office to develop a governance policy for implementing AI in government.
okay. We need to
Um,
have a separate conversation on this. We have an
yeah,
AI standing committee that was formed by our House. I'm going to go ahead and let people in now that Nimit's in, and we can wrap this little bit of conversation up and start
yep,
our session.
yeah,
Okay. You know, that's an area that I'm particularly focused on myself. With the regulatory authority that, that the AI committee in South Carolina is going to have. And then with the executive order, that's coming down the pipeline, I'm of the opinion, what's going to be left to regulate, to be perfectly,
right.
I mean, so that's an area that I'm particularly interested in, how we potentially, provide some safe havens for, the regulatory capture that, it looks like this industry is going to start out with versus crypto, which, it took them a while to figure out that they need to corral this, but now we've got this overreach that's going on. That's a whole nother story. So I want to take a moment and, we got off on a separate little discussion while we were on AI and its impact on or crypto, and policy. But I do want to take a moment to obviously welcome everybody. Start the session today, which is on blockchain and voting applications. How do we eradicate voter fraud? My guests today are Amelia Powers Gardner, Utah County Commissioner, and all-around blockchain advocate at all levels in Utah, and Nimit Sawhney, the founder of Votes, a voting platform that was used first in the West Virginia uh, uh, 2018 election, if I recall correctly. Nimit, was that correct? Yeah. And for absentee voters, military absentee voters. And we are expecting Carlos Torriello, fortunately is delayed right now. But Carlos was involved in the vote auditing of the Guatemalan national elections, and has been recognized for earlier work by the Government Blockchain Association for his first steps along these lines. And they've built a very interesting application on how to tabulate and audit the paper ballots in Guatemala. So with that, I want to welcome Amelia and Nimit, and we can add Carlos, hopefully he'll be showing up here. And Amelia, perhaps just a quick introduction on your side, both you and Nimit.
Yeah, so as he said, my name is Amelia Powers Gardner. I'm a county commissioner in Utah County, Utah. We're the second largest county in the state, about 750,000 residents, so a good medium-sized county nationwide. As was mentioned, I've been an advocate of blockchain and decentralized technology, particularly in government. I see that decentralization is a way to ensure transparency, as well as give confidence to citizens on how information is being handled, rather than the black box of government. Blockchain technology does a great job of bringing in transparency, immutability, and really making that trust easier to handle. I'm on Utah's Blockchain and Digital Innovation Task Force that oversees and screens all blockchain legislation coming into the state of Utah, as well as actively working with other states and helping them implement blockchain in a decentralized way with a bend towards self-sovereign. And been in the blockchain space since about 2019, when I launched utilized Nimit's product for the for elections, as well as launched a blockchain digital marriage certificate, and have been leading the way on having certified verifiable digital credentials utilizing blockchain technology.
Great, thank you. And Amelia, we are honored to have you with us.
Thank you.
Nimit?
Thanks, Dennis. Hi, everyone. My name is Nimit, one of the co-founders at Votes. Votes, as many of you know, is the first mobile app, blockchain-based, biometrics-enabled elections platform to be used by governments now in several states in the US, several cities in Canada, and 6 countries overall internationally. We started, as Dennis mentioned, in 2018 with our first election as part of the 2018 midterms. And as of last week, have converted or completed 131 elections now. And excited to be here and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Nimit, and I will say, Nimit and I have, some working experience from several years ago after the 2018 first use of the project. We were actively vying to bring the project to South Carolina in the 2020 election, and we worked with South Carolina Votes at that time. And unfortunately, just because of the logistics of their new voting system coming out, the machines that they were rolling out, in the time frame, when we finally got to a point where everybody realized that this was something that we definitely wanted to do, just got to be a little bit too late. So, I'm just pleased to be able to bring all this back together again. Just from a general, before we really get started, we have a video I think I want everybody to see of real life applications from that standpoint. But just generally, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the different voting systems, including, paper ballots and e-voting, and then obviously, a blockchain as an underlying tech. Nimit, I mean, just from your standpoint as a developer, what would you, how do you see the comparison?
Sure. So our opinion is that giving voters the most amount of choice is ultimately the best approach. So every method of voting that you outlined has its benefits. It also has its risks. So the way to implement any method of voting is to ensure you have proper risk mitigation. So paper ballots work well in certain situations. Postal ballots work well in certain situations. Electronic voting on touchscreen machines works well in certain situations, and remote voting, where people can vote from anywhere on a phone, also works well in certain situations. So the challenge obviously is every method has its risks, and how do you mitigate and how do you put the whole package together. So let's take the example of voters or persons who are living overseas, away from their home jurisdictions. Obviously, voting in person isn't an option for them. Mail tends to be sometimes unreliable, and so using a digital technology is the most viable and convenient approach for them. Similarly, a voter with a disability may not be able to hand mark a paper ballot, but using an iPhone or a tablet, they can take advantage of modern accessibility features and mark their ballot privately without violating their privacy. So that's how I would encourage people to look at it. There's no one method that's do all, fit all for all situations. I think giving voters the choice and the most amount of choice so that they can use a system that works, the approach that works best for them. And obviously everything has to be integrated, which it is wherever our systems are deployed currently. So that would be my take on it.
And Amelia, I mean, obviously you're controlled by statute of what you can and cannot offer from that standpoint. Just kind of a preliminary question, before you actually utilized, the votes platform, initially, was there any restriction, that would have required you to make any kind of statutory change?
No, so we didn't actually have to make any statutory changes to utilize the votes platform, but Nimit makes a great point. And there's disadvantages and advantages to every different system of voting. So a lot of people think that the safest, most tried and true way would be like on paper at the polls on election day. But what they need to look at historically, on paper at the polls on election day, Lyndon B. Johnson stole a Senate race in Texas. This is a proven fact. By the time they realized he'd done it, he was already sworn in as a United States Senator, and they decided not to do anything about it. And he ended up going on to become the vice president under John F. Kennedy. And then under that assassination became the president of the United States. And it's a proven fact that he stole an election on paper at the polls on election day in Texas. On top of that, the DOJ had to come in and take over elections in the city of Chicago because they were ballot stuffing on paper at the polls on election day, right? So now with that said, we didn't have to change anything in Utah, but when I came in as the county clerk and we started looking at all the different systems, in I think 32 or 33 states now, you're allowed, if you're an overseas and military member, what's called a UOCAVA voter, you're allowed to return your ballot electronically. So all 50 states plus the District of Columbia under federal law, under the UOCAVA federal law for voting, has to provide ballots electronically to active members of the military, their families, and citizens living overseas. And then 32 or 33 states, Utah being one of them, requires us to receive ballots back electronically. So what that means is that for people living overseas in those areas, they were utilizing email or fax machine to return their ballots. And email or fax, there is no anonymity. So your right to a secret ballot is completely null and void because you have to, when you send the email back, we verify that you're the emailer and then we recopy your ballot. So somebody, usually a minimum of 2 people, if you've got any decent controls or standards, are filling out your ballot for you. So they see how you voted. On top of that, for example, with a fax machine, I sat on an airplane next to a lady who worked for the State Department. And the last time that she had voted, she filled out her ballot. She got an email with her ballot, printed it out, filled it out, gave that ballot to her husband, who then gave it to his boss, who then gave it to his secretary to fax it back to their home jurisdiction, right? And that's even before it gets to the elections office, let alone whoever happened to be walking past that fax machine, whoever had to pick up that fax, and then who had to recreate that ballot for recording purposes and for tabulation purposes. So no law had to change, but really what it was is looking at what is a superior way that provides that anonymity and security that is well beyond. Beyond that, for those using email, if you work for the State Department or the DOD and you're stationed overseas, they will literally tell you don't use your secure government email because the attachment that has your ballot on it won't get through our filters. So they're actually encouraging you to use a less secure system, i.e. your Gmail or Yahoo, to vote because it's less secure and therefore the attachment makes it through successfully. And so I didn't really have to change any laws. What I did though is just look at what is this compared to what we're actually doing today.
Right. So obviously addressing the advantages over, and obviously based on the need, each voter segment, then apparently has, some different needs as well. So, and in this case, in work with, with votes, all those needs are certainly met. Do you have, perhaps a little demo video that?
Yeah. And as we look at I think one of the videos we may show a person that Nimit and I helped vote in 2020. As we look at that one, that's not an overseas voter, but this is a voter that doesn't have the ability to hold a pencil. So how could they fill out a paper ballot, right? And I think that we may see that as well. But just to your point, that for different voters, there's going to be different needs. And as an election official, finding the way to help a voter vote in the way that works best for them is critical.
Looks like we may have lost Dennis.
It does
Do
look
you,
that way.
Nimit, do you have
I was just gonna
that
say,
link?
Dennis,
Yeah, I can pull up a couple of links. One moment.
Yeah, we can have, I think if Nimit has access to it, maybe we can have him share screen and have Nimit show us the demo videos on the way that you do.
I'll share my screen and I'll post a link here as well. So this is, can everybody see the screen?
yes, it looks good.
Yes. Yes, we can see.
So this is the voter Amelia was mentioning earlier. So Maxine was at time the oldest living voter in the state of Utah. She actually was born before women had the right to vote. So, and she had voted in every election since 1920, I believe. So this is her not being able to go to the polling station. So as part of the pilot project, an iPad was brought to her home. So this is kind of her experience because Fox News happened to show up right there. So it's a minute and a half. So I'll start it right now.
This is Max. She's Utah's oldest active voter. That made me feel like an old lady. When Maxine was born,
If we can turn up the sound a little, let us do that.
I can remember when I voted the first time.
she's taken full advantage of women's suffrage.
I think it's a privilege to vote. One vote can make a difference. And I think it's important that we know what we're voting for.
Today, this veteran voter is seeing something new. An electronic ballot.
I'm just sort of in between. I know they move the schools that I'm sort of in the bottom.
All she needs is a smart device and the Votes app.
That's pretty cool.
People that can't make it to the polls. Right now, it's approved for military and overseas voters, and we've just expanded it to disabled voters as well.
Giving people like Maxine
Oh, it's, I like that one.
cons- that other counties in the state are in Provo, L. Thomas, Fox 13 News.
How's that?
What you saw there, let's see if the sound goes through. So Maxine, I actually grew up just around the block from Maxine. And when we put out on social media, we put out and said, hey, do you have anybody that you know that would like to vote, but is having a hard time voting with the options that are currently available? That's getting to the polls or filling out their mail-in ballot. And I got a reply from some folks that actually are in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And their reply was that, you know, they thought that Maxine would really like this. And it was hard to hear. One of the things that you hear Maxine, they were talking to her about the fact that she was born before women in the United States had the right to vote. And they asked her about that. And she commented that as she was growing up, that she was told that women weren't smart enough to be able to vote. And the irony of this is that Maxine was a department head at a major university. She was a department head at Brigham Young University. And at 106 years old, as she was going through that ballot, we were sitting in the room with her and she was talking about the initiatives, and she was very well informed. At 106, she was very well informed about the initiatives. She knew exactly what she was voting for. She knew exactly how she wanted to vote. But actually, that screenshot that you have right here is the perfect example where you can see how thick her knuckles are. At 106 years old with a rheumatoid arthritis, she literally didn't have the ability to hold a pencil. So she couldn't hold a pencil to fill out a ballot, and she couldn't sign the ballot to prove that it was her. And if she had signed it, we would never have been able to verify that signature because she couldn't hold the pencil well enough because of her rheumatoid arthritis. But this is an example of where the technology enabled her to be able to vote, and we could vote secretly, and we could record her ballot. And it's, you know, very helpful in this scenario. So this is a domestic example of how this is a superior way to vote, as well as we had the overseas example for people working in the State Department or in the military. But that's just one way to utilize blockchain technology to help secure a vote. I don't know how well you can hear her there.
Yeah, Dennis, the audio is not coming through, it seems very low.
And it looks like that link is in the chat box if anybody wants to go through and you can hear it yourself.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
And
I say yes. I don't know. I
Yeah,
think Dennis
okay.
may be having issues with his audio.
yeah, I'm just okay. Tie the mobility of her being able to vote at her blockchain. I can't quite grasp the link there yet. Does that make sense as a question?
No.
Okay. Okay, why don't I just have a ballot on my phone and just she puts it in and I transfer that electronically? What's blockchain got to do with it?
If you record the ballot on a blockchain ledger utilizing a cryptographic key that gives her anonymity, then on election day, we refer back to that blockchain, that immutable record, and print off that ballot. It adds the level of transparency and immutability that you want with an election. So yeah, we could just send her a ballot on her phone and she could just send it back. But what verification does she have that her vote was recorded as she cast it? Because there's no paper trail, right? So when you're auditing an election, you go back to the paper trail to make sure that ballots were counted as they were cast. When you're using an electronic ballot, there's no paper trail. And so what you need to do at that point is you need to have a record that's immutable, unchangeable, like your paper record, that if I cross things out on the paper, I can see it. We want to have an immutable record, and a blockchain does that for us. But having it on a distributed record makes us ensure that it can't be changed, right? There's really no other viable way to do that. The other aspect of that is her having the ability later to go back and see that that record was recorded. So then we use the cryptography to add an identifier to that so that you as the individual can go back and check your ballot, as well as on the flip side as an administrator, when we print off these ballots from the electronic record, i.e. the blockchain, we want a way to be able to ensure that the ballot that we printed matches that record. I think, Dennis,
Yeah.
we're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah,
I do a
can hear
follow-up
this.
question on that. While Dennis is figuring out his audio, can I ask a question on a follow-up from George's question?
Yeah.
What blockchain are you specifically referring to?
Nimit, do you want to talk about what blockchain you utilize?
Yes, so the vote
Blockchain.
system is currently utilizing a Hyperledger based network. So there is a 64 node network operational in the US. There's a 32 node network in Canada, and there are a few other nodes in other places as well. The reason we picked Hyperledger was early on, there was a lot of concern about using a fully permissionless network because there are jurisdictional laws involved. So just to give you an example, theoretically, you could write a digital ballot to a Bitcoin chain or an Ethereum chain or an Avalanche or an Algorand. But legally speaking, you cannot then prove that the data for that election did not leave the bounds of the United States, which is a requirement, similar requirement in other countries. So until the fully public chains or fully permissionless chains have a way to provide a governance layer, which governments are looking for, those layers are being built now, but they currently don't exist. So the only way to do that is to build a network like we did on Hyperledger, where every election jurisdiction has the ability to set those bounds. So if you were, let's say, an administrator of Georgia County and you wanted to say all nodes for this election must reside in the state of Georgia, you can do that with the Hyperledger network, set that as a bounds, and what that will do is it'll make sure the network only runs within those bounds. The related thing to keep in mind is who runs these nodes. So obviously, we as the technology platform seed a few nodes, but then the government can run nodes, the election offices obviously, nonprofits can run nodes, all the major political parties can run nodes, you as an individual can run nodes. The key difference here is you do not get any monetary remuneration. So you could run a Bitcoin node or an Ethereum node by yourself and expect to collect mining fees if you were to mine a block. That is not the case here. To avoid a financial conflict of interest, if you were to want to run a node for an elections network currently, you would have to do it out of goodwill. You would need to have a spare server on a node or wherever on a cloud, and you would have to attest that you're doing it out of non-profit, non-partisan intent, pass through a basic cybersecurity check, and then you can do it. So the combination of that kind of explains why the network currently runs on Hyperledger. And that gives us the best of both worlds. It helps us satisfy the legal requirements, as well as lets you take advantages of a distributed ledger network, which Amelia just described a little while ago. And one last thing someone asked the question, how is blockchain relevant here? So there are a few things to keep in mind when you are doing a digital ballot, doing a digital election. You have to secure the ballot before it's cast, during the act of casting, and after it's cast, right? So the blockchain doesn't have a major role at the moment in the first step. In the second step, a partial role. And the third step is where it's most useful as a very, very secure, immutable database that cannot be tampered with, that's private for the voter, it's auditable, and at the same time, lets you produce a paper ballot for tabulation, lets independent audits happen. And so that way you are able to, make sure no system administrator somewhere, no hacker, no third party has that access to be able to modify the data once it's cast, which is not true of a traditional database or a more traditional method of storing data.
Yeah, thanks, Nimit. I think Dennis, we're still having a hard time hearing you. Not sure what you've got. I know it looks like Bob Huddleston asked a couple of questions in the chat box. One of them is how do you ensure voter ID? And this is going to depend on the method. I think one of the things that I think we'll talk about, I don't know if Carlos was able to join us, but there's multiple ways to utilize blockchains in the election system and in voting. And we can kind of explain if Carlos doesn't have the opportunity to join us, I think we can explain a little bit what he does later. But in this aspect, Nimit's solution and some of the other solutions, they utilize an identity verification where you're taking a picture of your government issued ID and you're doing a selfie verification with a biometric verifier. So how do you know that somebody else isn't using that device? Because when they cast that ballot, you have to have the biometric identifier, whether it be a thumbprint on an Apple device or whether it be a selfie that has been verified against a government issued ID. So there is an ID check. And in fact, the ID check working through the electronics is significantly higher accuracy than the ID check of the little lady at the polling location who's looking at a driver's license picture that you took years ago, assuming there is a driver's license pic. So the ID check is actually pretty robust and helps there. The other part of the question was how do we prevent voter fraud associated with voter roll maintenance, ghost voters, and ineligible voters? Well, it's very easy. You verify the identity before we push the ballot to you. So when we verified your identity, we're checking to see if you're on the voter rolls and if you're a valid voter. So for example, it's not like anybody can just pick up the phone and vote. Like you actually have to sign up and say, I want an electronic ballot. And then we check the voter rolls before we actually push you the ballot. And so I think the biggest issue here is not the methodology of voting. It's not whether you're voting on paper, whether you're voting electronically, whether you're voting however. The bigger issue is, do you have clean voter rolls, right? We're only going to push a ballot to somebody whose identity has been verified electronically. The key is having clean voter rolls. And that's regardless of whether you're voting on paper at the polls on election day or whether you're voting electronically or remotely. Voter roll maintenance is something that we definitely need to look at.
All right, okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Oh, great. Okay, super. Well, I've got Carlos's documentary pulled up, and I can go ahead and share that screen. It's a little lengthy, but so we may just catch the the meat of it, and then come back for some additional questions.
Before you start, Dennis, are you going to go ahead and start? Sorry.
Okay, here we go.
Got it.
Want to see that?
Yeah.
Okay, of course, there's no.
It's on mute,
there's
though.
no- There we go.
So I don't think, I mean, we can't hear it, so I can maybe, as you
Oh,
watch,
I'm sorry.
we-
Okay, you cannot hear it?
no,
Oh, okay, I'm
we
sorry.
can't. So
right.
what's happening here is in this election, these the ballots were all cast on paper, and then those paper ballots at each polling location were counted, and then the results of that counting are sent back to a centralized location. Okay, so think of it like each city has its own polling location, and they're voting by paper, and they have bipartisan people counting that paper, and then they send a number to their central election authority, and basically like they send that number to that central authority, and then they seal up those ballot boxes, and then those ballot boxes get sent. But what was happening in Guatemala is that each of the numbers that were being sent individually, when they get sent to the central location for tabulation, those numbers were getting changed.
Right.
So in each city, they would send their results, but there was the only place that ever saw all of those results was the central location, was the central authority. And that central authority was then seizing all the paper ballots so that you couldn't audit it. And that central authority was just announcing the results, but there was zero transparency. And so what the accusation is that when that central authority got together, they just basically announced whatever winner they want. And there was no way to verify that because all of the paper ballots were sealed and then seized by the central authority. And then all of the individual cities that were reporting their results, there was no way to see each individual cities except for at the central location. So what Carlos did is this is an after the fact, after the ballots were cast, each individual location then counts their ballots, and then they recorded their count on the blockchain using a Bitcoin blockchain. So what happens then is everybody can see what was the count in city A, what was the count in city B, what was the count in city C. And so then even though those numbers are sent back to a central location, they're recorded publicly and on a mutable record on the Bitcoin blockchain so that everybody can see if the central authority actually counts up and the totals accurately to ensure a winner. And then even if the paper ballots are seized, if the local bipartisan election commission verifies those numbers and records them on the blockchain, everybody can see how every city voted.
And they had volunteers, I believe, in every district, every precinct, that were part of that audit process. And their function really was obviously to be able to take that, that tabulation at the end of the day, and then scan that tabulation, and I believe hash that, and that's what allowed them to bring all that data together into the audit that determined the vote, even before they had a physical vote count, from my understanding. Are you familiar with that level of the background, Amelia?
I think it's just that there was and I'm not as familiar with that level, but they had volunteers in every area that certified and verified this is my city's vote. So then each individual city was able to record that on a blockchain.
Well, I'm going to stop this here.
Paper ballots got seized by the central authority because each individual location had already verified what their count was.
Right. So they got ahead of the auditing process, got ahead of the information that was flowing to the government at that point. I'm going to go ahead and stop this now. Obviously, we've got this in the chat, and everybody can certainly get that link and finish that video. And apologize for the technical issues I've had, but we are making it through one step at a time. So any other questions from anybody in attendance? Greg,
hey Dennis.
Like you muted off, yeah.
Yeah, just going back to the technology, with Hyperledger being, and I don't know a lot about Hyperledger, except I think it's a foundation. So is the application security based on the number of nodes, that's supporting it? And that's one question. And if it is, and that node count starts to drop, either the Hyperledger Foundation no longer exists, and the nodes start to shrink, what's the safeguard to ensure the security of the network?
Oh,
Well, so here's the thing. If the Hyperledger Foundation goes away, then you just switch to a different blockchain technology. Once the election has been certified, it doesn't matter if that, technically election, and technically election material only needs to be retained for 22 months. Once you get past that 22 months, you destroy all that data anyway. So 22 months from now, if Hyperledger Foundation doesn't exist, who cares?
Gotcha. So you just pivot to a new platform.
Yeah. So conceptually speaking, the voting platform is blockchain agnostic. So it's not dependent on anything inherent to Hyperledger or anything else. The reason, as I mentioned, we picked Hyperledger was because of the governance and the legal issues which are prevalent at the moment, which may change in the future. So if Hyperledger goes away, there are other ways to spin up a similarly capable network now. Avalanche has this capability where you can run a completely permission network in certain geographical bounds. So there are other, networks coming up. So you're not tied to it. That's why the platform as such is agnostic.
I think this may be a good time to talk about the BMM, the blockchain maturity model, and why that matters. Nimit's platform has received the blockchain maturity model certification, and the blockchain maturity model was created by the Government Blockchain Association, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that utilizes a level of standards that they come in. So one of the things they're going to look for is exactly what you're saying. Is it a blockchain agnostic technology? Because if the technology is highly dependent on one blockchain, if that blockchain were to go under, then the technology you would obviously have a major issue. So that's going to be one of the things they're looking for. One of the other things that the BMM looks for is to see if more than 50% of the nodes are controlled by one CTO, right? So Nimit's got 64 nodes in the United States, 32 in Canada. If more than 50% of those nodes was under the control and jurisdiction of one government authority, then that government authority would have the ability to manipulate that blockchain in theory. And so that's what you're looking for. You want to have, those many nodes across those different things. And so Nimit just put in the chat box the link to his certification from the BMM. But that's why looking for a third-party organization that can verify the technology, that can see, is this blockchain agnostic, or if you've used a blockchain, is that blockchain a stable enough blockchain to be utilized for a governmental purpose?
One small thing to add there. Because of the newness, still blockchain technology is still pretty new, even though for more years now. But in terms of real world use cases, it's still fairly new. And as with any new technology, there's always a lack of standards. So if you look at, blockchain implementations, not just in the world of elections, but any space, there is an extreme lack of standardization, and that leads to a host of problems. One of the reasons, fintech or other industries are able to move faster is because there has been a core set of standards available in the past, which, people are able to attest to, and then people can build against that. So what the Government Blockchain Association has been trying to do is build those set of standards which are focused on different kinds of blockchain use cases, whether it's identity, whether it's fintech or governance or voting or supply chain. And so it's a very important initiative because standards is the first stage after you completed the pilot stage to get a technology into the mainstream, because then different players, different parties can come in and attest to its a stability and also its scalability and its ability to address different kinds of extreme scenarios. So we would encourage everybody to look at that. It's an open framework. You can participate in working groups on whichever use case appeals to you, and and provide feedback to the GBA group. They are actively looking for feedback as well.
Amelia, let me pose this question to you. I mean, from start to finish, how long did it take the state to accept the technology and actually implement, the first vote?
So with the overseas and military members, I mean, for a state to be able to accept it for like all individuals, it would take legislation. It would take some. We'd actually have to have an update to the VVSG and the Vistal standards, and I mean, it would be a long process if we wanted every person voting utilizing this type of technology. That's a years-long process. But for certain demographics, for those voting overseas, for those 32, 33 states that currently allow the electronic return of ballots, they could do that today. It would literally just take someone like myself in a local jurisdiction, or someone like Mac Warner in West Virginia, who started this with NIMIT in 2018 for his Iokawa voters. It would literally just take an elected official who's willing to go in and do that. For people with disabilities, after I did that in 2019, I was the first one in the country to do that in 2019. Several other states started allowing that, and almost every state that has done that, it does take legislation, but that legislation almost always passes unanimously. I mean, it's really hard to say like, hey, can people with disabilities vote in the same way that's already been vetted for our members of our military? That typically is not a hard lift. But it does, if it does require legislation, that can take anywhere between 6 months and a year. But as far as vetting the technology, as long as you recognize that you're comparing this to what's currently in place, for example, if you're comparing this technology to email, it's not that hard to see that this is more secure than even the haters. Even the people that vehemently have decided that like NIMIT is the spawn of Satan and I need to come after him, even those people admit that his technology is superior to email voting, right? And so really it takes an elected official with courage, and that's actually significantly harder than getting the laws passed.
Indeed. Obviously, the focus is to get reelected. As opposed to innovate sometimes.
I haven't seemed to have any problems getting reelected, but here's the difference. I don't care if I get reelected because I make more money in the private sector. So I'm willing to do these things, even though it might scare people, because once I've gone through and I've evaluated it and I see that it's true and it's superior and it works, then I'm willing to do it. That's just really hard. I mean, there's not a ton of people like me, unfortunately.
Right. And I mean, I think that was one of the observations when I met Bob the other night at the local Republican Party meeting, that his comment was that there are not enough technologists in politics, or certainly politicians that understand technology, and
Amen.
getting that mix is key.
On the call, Dennis, if you don't mind me jumping in, is a politician, not a politician, but aligned with politics. She asked a question I kind of would like to see if somebody, her initials are ER. It's in the chat.
Yes. Yeah, I've got this here as far as it's in the chat. Yeah. And,
take that. And I say I concur with her question. And I'm fascinated with the first aspect beyond the election is identity of the voter, verifying that. I think that's a great road to go down. But anyway, that's all I got. If you could address ER's question, I think it's ER.
I think ER's question goes more toward it appears to me in-person voting with representatives from each side present, for as a trust mechanism.
I
Let me
can
ask,
I can
yeah,
address that, Dennis. So yeah, so that's an important question. If the network is operated by, partisan organizations or organizations which are not balanced on all sides of the spectrum, then yes, you could end up creating a problem. But that's just to say, so election officials in most jurisdictions in the country are elected as well, right? They belong to one or the other party. And so they are elected in a partisan process, but most election officials, act for the public good. They conduct, by most accounts, very efficient elections in most parts of the country. And so you have to look at it from that perspective. There will be people in anything you do who belong to different parts of the idea space, the political space. And the good thing about having a network like this running on the chain is you can have everybody participate. So all major parties participate, election officials participate, nonprofits participate, individual citizens can participate. And as you go through the literatures, I would recommend looking through the BMM criteria as well, and trying not to be too technical. There is a concept known as the diversity criteria when you are creating a blockchain network. And that diversity criteria specifically takes care of this aspect where you look at who is controlling the network, what are their affiliations, how much, controlling power do they have. And so if you ensure that your node diversity criteria is balanced, then you can make sure that, no misuse is possible. So it's a good question, and I would encourage you to read up on the node diversity criteria. It's specifically designed to make sure trust is built amongst people who don't trust each other. And if you want to read up, there's a historical equivalent from the times of the Romans. There's something called Byzantine generals problem. So in olden times, when kings and queens would go to war, you didn't have modern methods of communication. You had a big army, you had a few generals, and they are in different geographical locations. How do you trust them, right? There was no way to trust everybody 100%. And so this the criteria as it's designed is based on that same problem, where you assume that a certain percentage of people will not act the way they are supposed to, i.e. they're not trustworthy. So you build that into the formula and you make sure that as long as there are enough honest people on all sides of the spectrum, the network never gets violated. So it's a very interesting mathematical and a probabilistic problem as well, not just a social problem. And technology has a way to solve that. So
yeah, and it's the same with any other way. I mean, I think the question there, you say that you understand election law and election processes, then you recognize that, as Nimit said, an elected official oversees those processes, and that's a partisan elected official, and they utilize other technologies. This actually has a distribution and has more of checks and balances than the current systems that we're using.
Right. Well, Amelia, I know you have to go. So
I do.
we
I have a
will
hard stop at
thank you so
11:30.
much, obviously,
Mhm.
for joining in and also emceeing in my absence, although quick, but nonetheless, needless to say, it is what it is. Carlos has joined us, so if everybody would like to stay on, obviously we were only able to show a portion of the video, so I'd love to have perhaps a little more conversation for Carlos and what happened in Guatemala, and Amelia will be in touch as far as April is concerned.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
We'll get you to Charleston. Thank you so much. Okay. All right, Carlos, thank you for joining us. I mean, got a little bonus round here, as part of the show. And I want to introduce everybody to Carlos Torres, who is in Guatemala and has worked with the help put that whole audit program together. So, Carlos, maybe I'll just give you a quick overview, background, and sort of a synopsis of what you all did with, specifically with the use of the Bitcoin blockchain. I think that certainly garners a lot of interest, from just the simplicity aspect of what you've done.
Sure. And apologies, I'm late. My calendar had showed that we were starting right now, so if there was confusion there, my bad. But regardless, it's a pleasure. I think show and tell is a bit better. So if I can share my screen, then this might be easier. Let me see 1 second. And this one. Okay. So can folks see my screen?
Yes.
My Zoom seems to have frozen, so hopefully I can still navigate. But no, everything seems frozen. Oh boy. Let me try sharing the screen again. So yeah, my name is Carlos Torriello. I am from Guatemala. What I'm showing you at the moment, and please confirm if you can see, is how Guatemala, the country that's right after Mexico, does its national voting reporting. We just had our general election this year. And if any one of you follows elections outside of the United States and has heard anything about Guatemala, we have made headlines and continue to do so with the national prosecutor arguing that there was massive election fraud. And so this current election is still being contested. Literally on Friday, the prosecutor's office that oversees elections openly and publicly asked for the elections to be repeated because of the accusations of election fraud. And the work that I'm about to show you, I think, demonstrates that these accusations of election fraud are unfounded, and we have the technology to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and actually very precisely using cryptography and mathematics. So what you are seeing here is a picture of our national total. This is a picture of the entire country of Guatemala split up into our voting districts. There are 23 of them. Hard to see them all there, but that's all of them. And specifically, I'm looking at Presidente and Vicepresidente, which is our president and vice president election. If I click over here on this tab, this is the National Congress. So because we had general elections, people actually received 5 ballots. Guatemala does paper ballots. So these paper ballots were literally like hand scrawled, and they marked their intention. And so that's why you see 5 different options here. So let's just go back to the president and vice president, because that's the one that's causing all the uproar. And that's the one that's, obsessing the media and the criminal justice system. So if we scroll down, we start to see the distribution between different political parties of the percentage of votes that this website publishes. I forgot to say that up here you can see portal TSE. TSE is the acronym for our National Election Authority. Unlike the United States, Guatemala has one national election authority that coordinates all of the elections. So similar to kind of like how Amelia is the county clerk for her county, the TSE is the clerk for the entire nation. And so in our case, we had 9 million registered voters in the nation, and 4.2 million people showed up to vote. So these are the distributions for president, as you can see some of the numbers there and the percentages, but these are national, right? And so this is just a database and a website. I'm of the philosophy of don't trust, verify. So if we wanted to see whether or not this is true, the easiest thing to do is there's a little button over here that allows you to input the table number. So I'm going to put table number 1. Nationally, we had over about 25,000 tables. So I could write down 24,700 because it's not exactly 25,000. And actually, it's probably 500. And it would jump to that specific table number. So very easily, I can look at all 25,000 voting tables. In this case, I'm going to go back to table number 1. Right? And so instead of looking at the totals now, what we are looking at is the tallies or the totals of every single political party and the number of votes that they got at that table. But again, these are just fancy little graphs on a database. If I want to verify what this whether or not this is true, the authorities provided me with this unique little button here that says ver, in Spanish to see, and it literally says the acta digitalizada, or the digitized minutes of the table, and has some details here on whether or not it was scanned or a mobile. And if I click that button, it takes us to the actual primary source document that Guatemala uses for our elections. And so this yellow picture that you see is the equivalent of the primary source document of our elections. You can see some numbers here. It says up here 277, and then the distribution by parties over here, and the summations. So what this is actually the tally of all the votes cast at that table. This table had 277 citizens that voted, and this is the distribution. And so one of the differences between the Guatemalan system and the US system is that this is the official document. It's not the individual ballots. It's the summary of that total eliminates the individual ballots. The reason for that is it's voting table volunteers that are citizens in front of political party witnesses that do the individual counting. And so over 100,000 people are doing this counting simultaneously in a very unique civic experience that mobilizes, I said 4.2 million people showed up to vote. 100,000 of them were volunteers, and then another 100 or 200,000 of them were political party representatives. So in Guatemala, over 5% of the voting population actually participated at the tables. And that's why their work removes the need to count the individual ballots, but rather we count these summary sheets. But again, this is just a JPEG. I could click, right click this and save this image. Look for, a little folder on my desktop and dump it there, and let's call this example 1. So I could now show you that document, right? And please confirm that it's coming up on the screen. Is it coming up? So yeah, so one thing I could do would be to kind of put this next to the website, right? And so confirm visually whether or not the numbers coincide, right? It match 10, 3, 55, 37 seems like a match, right? So now all we need to do to don't trust verify is to count all of them, right? But I said there's 25,000 of them. That's potentially millions of data points. So it's tricky. The first thing that we did with Bitcoin is the national authority decided to add this very obvious orange button here that says verify hash. If you click on that, it actually takes you to a separate third-party provider that built a tool called the Immutable Backup Service. And so what they did was just timestamp when these documents existed on the internet. So if the election authorities, or anyone for that matter, tampers with this JPEG and alters the image, it would alter the information, what's called the hash, essentially the digital information inside the document. And so that would make it evident. However, we would need to know what the original document looked like. So that's literally what the Immutable Backup Service does. It provides the SHA-256 hash of that JPEG file. It tells us exactly when it was received and into that third-party database, which was 1:42 a.m. And then it gives us a link to the Bitcoin blockchain, which is where the block was. And so that block, because the Bitcoin blockchain is essentially a time chain, actually has a timestamp for when that happened, right? So block number 795,977 was found at around 1:47 a.m. on June 26th. If we go back, we can confirm that the document was received at 1:42 a.m. On June 26th. So within 4 minutes, right? Since Bitcoin has 10-minute block times, it's very useful to have Bitcoin as essentially a public notary that confirms that this timestamp is likely to be correct, right? So essentially, all that Bitcoin is doing is providing this proof that the document exists as of that moment in time. What I did is I created a program called Digital Witness. In Spanish, it's fiscaldigital.net. And so people could go to this website and then register their phone number and receive a text message to confirm their participation in our audit. So the first thing that we would do as an auditor was to go into the website, go table by table, obviously with a script, and input, table number 1, download the JPEG. Then we'd go to table number 2, right? Download the JPEG. And that way we were able to create our own database of all of the documents, right? See the document change? And if I click Save Image As, and I create example number 2, then I could run a script that does this automatically, and all of a sudden on election night I'd have a copy, right? But as an auditor, it was very useful to have this immutable backup service to prove that the documents were never tampered. So once we did that, and we're able to have a ledger of all of the documents that we could prove that didn't change, we could start an audit. Why is that the case? Because as an auditor, if our results conflicted with the national authorities, we would want to demonstrate that we never tampered with any of the election results. So that's the first thing that Bitcoin was useful for, is to prove that there was no election tampering as of the moment of receipt by the election authorities of the documents. Now, when people went to this website, we can't do that now, but I'll show you. We sent them to our partners at Stackwork. They're a Bitcoin Lightning company. Stackwork is based in the United States, and they were able to help us build this incredibly powerful tool of auditing. And so people would just receive this link, click login, and then click on their user that they got through their SMS. And if you bear with me just 1 second, I will show you literally how this happened. If people want to send me a DM through Zoom, I can send you a trial, your own little user, so that you can try this as well. So right now I'm going to input this one user, F844805. So I can log in. This is what our users saw. We were able to get 1,700 people to do this. And so what you're about to see is what over 1,700 Guatemalans did to audit the election results. Once they logged in, they were shown this tutorial that told them your task is to enter the handwritten value. Then we start to show them some examples. They say, look, there's going to be a text box. You're going to see an image, and we want you to go down and enter the numbers, right? 002 in this case. You click next, and you would show it again. If it's blank, enter 000, and so on for all of the different examples. And so basically, people logged in, were taught how to do the audit, and then finally we're told, okay, 110 al rescate de Zacapa. And up here in the visual, you could even zoom in, right? So for folks that don't have great eyesight, you could click on that and say 049. Boom. Did you see that little button, the little pop-up that said 10? That's our point system that we would give people. If there was scratches, we asked people to only write numeral, numeral, numeral. That would be declared as illegible, because since it's handwritten, we decided that any errors should be declared illegible. And if you saw, I had 20, right? 10 and 10. So now up here, we had 20 people could keep a tally and compete with their neighbors. And so that's what we push people to do, is to just see who could do the most for democracy. So this is essentially gamification of a post-election audit using Satoshis. So if you click this big green button, you could then click an invoice via the Lightning Network. And if you'll give me 1 second, I'll be able to do this. And so if anyone has never experienced the Lightning Network, I highly recommend that you do so. It's going to be a little tricky since I don't have a Lightning address here, but basically, Dennis, why don't you send me a Lightning invoice for 10 sats, and I'll send it to you.
Unfortunately, my Lightning wallet is no longer.
Or I think I saw Doug there. If Doug could send me a Lightning invoice, I'll stop sharing just briefly.
Let me see. I may be able to get you something here. 1
second. And anyway, so in order to encourage participation, we were able to essentially send people their first Lightning transaction in exchange for their auditing service. However, that was just for people that figured out that there was an opportunity to use the Lightning Network. And if you give me just 1 second, that's essentially what we did. 1 second. And yeah, so I guess I'll wrap it up there. And
there we go. There's a.
Did you send it to me?
No, I'm just giving you the.
Can you send it through? Can you send it through Telegram? Copy the URL, send it through Telegram, and then show people your screen, and we'll send you 10 sats literally right now. And so the idea is gamifying post-election audits. I believe all elections should be audited. If you gamify them, then you can attract a young audience. We saw significant participation from particularly teenagers and especially female teenagers. For whatever reason, they're the most interested in participating in this. And so, yeah, I think if you're interested in figuring out how to increase female participation in elections, particularly teenagers, well, now I could just click copy. Can you show your cell phone again, Dennis?
Yes, hang on.
You put it on the video?
Let me, I'm trying to close your.
Just show, there you go. Open up your wallet Satoshi again.
Oh, sorry, yeah, there you go. Okay, you've got the
sending
invoice. And
so
I've received the Satoshis.
I just did what no one should do, which is do a live demo. But fortunately it worked because the Lightning Network is awesome. So yeah, feel free to DM me and I will send you users. So
yeah, well, great opportunity to demonstrate the Lightning Network as well. And there, I think we are over time, and rightfully so. With great content and information. I just want to thank everybody for joining us, Carlos. I really appreciate you coming on board, and sorry about the time issue. That might have been picked up from the invite I sent earlier today, but it did note time zone, so apologize if it didn't get to you correctly. But I want to thank everybody for coming, obviously, and joining us today. Nimit, thank you so much. Carlos, obviously, we'd love to chat with both of you about doing this same event in Charleston at our conference in April. I think it's certainly poignant and is part of what we're trying to accomplish and showing people actual use cases for blockchain and what's being built on Bitcoin. So our conference again, April 24th through the 26th. We have a special discount code in the chat, Holiday 50, that is good only through Christmas Day. And after that, the prices go up. So once again, thanks to everybody, and we look forward to a wonderful holiday, and everybody enjoy your time with your family, because come January, we all hit the ground running again very quickly.
Thank you. Bye.
Right. Thank you, Nimit. Thank you, Carlos. Thanks, Trish. Thank you, everybody.